Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin. My co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. He's not feeling so great today, so he may step in later, but he's resting right now. Our producer, Debra DeFranco, is going to step up in the co-host position, and James Tolley is our guest, and I'll tell you a little bit about him before I bring him on. He is the host, James Tolley is the host of the brand new Active Measures podcast, Stating the Obvious. In this podcast and in his weekly Zoom talk on the topic, James teaches about the many clear signs that the active measures process has been driving the American national political conversation for decades. He's a longtime Buddhist and couples communication coach. James is sensitive to the divisive communication patterns of narcissists, which are used against the masses in active measures campaigns. He's also the founder and chief technology officer of Concordis.io, designed to be the silver bullet to fake news and disinformation. So there's some terms that we introduced here that we're going to have James explain to us, like what is the active measures process and what is Concordis.io. But before I bring him on, I want to ask Debra to say her 2 cents, because Debra and I spent some time yesterday listening to James's Zoom broadcast, and it was fabulous. What would you like to say, Debra, before we bring on James?
No, I just want to say that I had never heard of active measures prior to the discussion with James yesterday. So it's an extraordinarily interesting concept. It's a very old concept from what I understand. And I think it's worth a listen for everyone because it explains all the societal chaos that exists today and how we got here. And it explains why we're so divisive. And hopefully he's going to provide us with solutions how to get past all these divisions. And I hand it off to you guys.
Okay, thanks. And one more thing I wanted to say. We're not going to get through this topic. This is a big topic. I mean, it's not going to be all today. We're going to have a series of shows on this. I do encourage you to listen to his Zoom. We're going to make sure we have all the links on aquarianradio.com for you to go in and find out more about this, because this is life-changing, world-changing, and we need to get this information out to the public. So with that, I want to welcome James Tolley, who, by the way, happens to live here in Maui, Hawaii, on the other side of the island from me and Dr. Lessin. So welcome to the show, James.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Right. So this is a huge subject, and we have 2 hours, and this is not visual, so this is audio. So I'm going to let you start for about maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then we're going to try to, fill in the blanks, ask questions. We're going to pretend we're the audience and say, but wait, what's that mean? Okay? So,
okay. Sounds good.
Take it away, James.
Thank you so much. To start out, what is active measures? So you can imagine that the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, they went all throughout the world and they wanted to transform societies, including democracies, into what's called client states, or states that are basically puppet regimes which are 100% controlled by either the USA or the USSR, but appear to be free and independent states, but are controlled through puppet regimes and where all their resources are really extracted out of those countries, with the people not even really knowing what's going on. So they developed a process to accomplish this. It's actually a centuries-old process, millennia-old process, and it comes from the old book called The Art of War, which is about 2,500 years old, which says that in order to, basically says, if you want to attack an enemy on the battlefield, that's the most least efficient and worst, most painful, most costly way to engage your enemy. If you want to do it in a more efficient way, you just subvert anything of value in the country of your enemy. So if everyone looks at the police as trusted heroes, for example, you want half the population to think of the police as violent abusers of their power, corrupt, and a danger to human well-being, which is exactly what we've seen in the United States. That's one of the telltale signs that we are being brought through the active measures process. So with the USSR and the USA wanting to create these client states and kind of dominate the world, they developed a process. They didn't go into each country willy-nilly without any kind of an idea of what they were going to do in order to take over the country. They had a blueprint for it. And fortunate for us, there was a high-level KGB defector whose name was Yuri Bezmenov. And Yuri Bezmenov was assigned to work in what was East Pakistan in the 60s, the late 60s. And he was working an active measures campaign in East Pakistan. And he kind of got religion. He fell in love with the Indian people, and he was an expert in the languages of that region. And he fell in love with their culture. He respected them as human beings. And after a while, he realized that the Soviet Union were not bringing, a liberation of the working man, of the proletariat to anywhere. They were just a bunch of murderous thugs. And once he realized that that was what he was doing with his life, he decided he wanted to defect. And he did that in 1970. He came to the West. He came to Greece. And he was interrogated by the CIA there for 6 months, debriefed on everything that he knew. And then he was allowed to live a life in Canada. And in the 80s, he was actually discovered by the Soviet Union as a broadcaster on a Canadian Canadian radio station. And once Russia found him, then he just decided, okay, he was still safe. He wasn't, extradited or anything like that. But he decided, I'm just going to tell everybody what I know about active measures because I am in a free country now, and I want to remain in a free country. And I don't want to have the United States. He moved to the United States and lived in Los Angeles. And he said very clearly, this is the last place to defect to. There's no place else in the world to go. If we're going to be sinking, we're going to be sinking together. And he loved the United States. He loved the West in general. He loved our freedom, ability to do things or not do things, to work for whatever we choose, to not have any state-run decisions made on our behalf. So he wrote a pamphlet called Love Letter to America, where he outlined the blueprint for active measures. He also created two videos. One is an interview, and the other is a lecture. They're both about an hour and 20 minutes long. The pamphlet's about 42 pages, I think, total, and the part about the blueprint of active measures starts on page 19. You can find that link in the materials associated with this radio show. And so those are the three foundational documents that I think are the most core documents about the blueprint for active measures. There are a lot of books written, a fair amount of books written and other things written about active measures. There's a movie about active measures that's recently made. But these things provide anecdotes. They provide, just kind of romantic stories about forgeries and espionage and things like that. But what Yuri Bezmenov was all about was delivering the blueprint for active measures. So what people don't realize is that the KGB, and we could assume the CIA, but he was talking about the KGB, and he said, people think the KGB is all about James Bond espionage and stealing plans on microfilm for supersonic jets and things like that. But that's only about 15% of what the KGB was doing at the time that he was there. The 85% of their manpower and resources were devoted to active measures in different countries, which is basically how to take over a country, destroy a country through legitimate means, and then exploit the country after you get them to the point where susceptible to civil war or to invasion. So you bring them to a crisis of some kind, you install your own regime, you install your allies, you install your people, and then you exploit the victory. So what we have now is you can see that we've gone through the active measures process probably about 90-95% of the way, and we have about 5 or 10% left. And because we can see over the course of decades, at least since Ronald Reagan was elected, we can see the active measures process, all of its goals, and the first 2 phases of a 4-phase process already very, very significantly accomplished. We can guess what the rest of the show looks like. You know, when you go to a movie and you go to a romantic comedy, it has a specific flow to it. 2 people meet, they fall in love, kind of, but they're not honest with each other. And then that dishonesty creates further problems that are usually really funny, threaten the relationship. The truth comes out. They may get back together, they may fall apart, and that's the big, Act 3 climax situation. But then in the end of the romantic comedy, they come together in the end. And you can pretty much predict that. If it's a romantic comedy, they're going to end up together in the end. In the same way, this whole thing is social engineering, but a lot of it is theater because it takes place in mass media. And so you see the first 2 acts have been accomplished perfectly, really, very, 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 very well. Probably over-accomplished for what is required. And so the 3rd act, which we unfortunately have to look forward to, we can predict what's going to be. Okay? So I wonder if that's enough of an introduction, or I could go into the 4 phases of active measures.
You have any questions, Debra?
No, go into the 4 phases. Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks so much. So, according to the blueprint that is left to us, there are 4 phases to the active measures process. And you can find this again in Yuri Bezmenov's pamphlet called Love Letter to America. The 4 phases are called demoralization, which lasts over 15 years, destabilization, which is the phase that I believe we're now in, crisis phase. The destabilization phase lasts 2 to 5 months. The crisis phase is probably coming, and that lasts 2 to 5 months. The destabilization phase lasts 2 to 5 years. And then after the crisis phase, we have normalization, a phase that's called normalization. So normalization is an Orwellian, cynical term that basically means there's a new normal that is not at all normal. It's where the people have no rights and they're manipulated through violence and threats of violence. Before the crisis, there's an open, free society. People get to, criticize the government. People get to have all kinds of interests in terms of women's lib and, prison reform and police reform and things like that. After the crisis, the victors have no interest in having any dissent or any liberation projects happening in the society. All they want to do is they want to exploit the victory. And so they use a heavy hand to come in and create order, and that order supports their exploitation efforts. So to go through, again, the 4 phases: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. The demoralization process has to happen first, and because it takes years. What Yuri Bezmenov says, it takes at least 15 years because that's how long it takes to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy. But really what we have is a social engineering process that doesn't only work on the realm of ideas, but of lifestyle and social institutions. So over a long period of time, we have basically a psychological warfare campaign against the United States and its citizens, where slowly you do things like you get people to be, believe it or not, one of the goals is to get people to be overweight and unhealthy, for example. And so we see that in the United States. We have an obesity epidemic in the United States. That's one thing. You replace authentic organizations with fake organizations. So if you have a strong religious world, if you have a strong religious community in a country, you really want to destroy that religion by politicizing it, by commercializing it, and by entertainmentalizing it. That's what he what he says. And what you get by destroying religion is something that the result of that process is something he calls death wish, which is incredibly interesting, if you ask me, for a communist state process to want to destroy religion in order to bring about a spirit of death wish in a country, because obviously communists were thought that religion was of no value and was hurting society to begin with. And that was their official line. But in their unofficial line, apparently they realized that religion helps people to have authentic relationships with themselves and authentic relationships with each other, and have a commitment to something that is that's larger than themselves, that they're willing to give up their entire lives for, in devotion to. So if you have that kind of a situation, you want to destroy it because you want people to be very confused. You want people to not be committed to loving everyone and forgiving everyone. You want people to be divisive against one another. You want them to be susceptible to stories of blame and make wrong against other Americans, right? So if you have an authentic community that is devoted genuinely to loving everyone and forgiving everyone, you're not going to be able to instill in them a hatred of other Americans or other people in the same country as themselves. So you have to destroy religion. And we can see that, I can see that anyway, and maybe you can see it as well, in the transformation of religion over the past 50, 70, 100 years. And I'm only saying that active measures is going on for the past 50 years, but I don't say that it hasn't gone on longer than that. So how has religion changed in the United States in the last 50 years? It's become more evangelical. There was a very, very strong cultural divide between, evangelical Christians and the rest of the country in a couple really important ways. One is the abortion issue, obviously. Evangelical Christians have been told for decades that people who support abortion are evil and are going to hell, and people who vote for Democrats are going to be going to hell. So that's a way of politicizing religion. We see that another kind of just an ideology. So this is something that's really core to the process of active measures, is you twist an ideology and you insert that ideology into society in order to create a power struggle and an excuse to get into arguments and to not compromise and to escalate those arguments and power struggles over decades. So what we have in case of religion and the evangelical community, in order to crack them apart into a very us and them tribal mind against the rest of society, something was introduced called, creationism is true, evolution is not true, or intelligent design is true, the Bible is true, and evolution is not true. And so this, although I have no personal knowledge of this, of course, this trend in human society where you start out with a community that's fairly regularly connected to each other and believes that they have a shared identity, shared problems, shared solutions. You want to crack that community apart, and you want to get them into animosity and antagonism with each other. And so that story of creationism is just as valid as evolution, is a story that had the effect of achieving an active measures goal, which is cracking society into two communities and then getting them to engage in power struggle with each other, all because of an ideology, a conflict in ideology. When you have a single community, what a community is really, and each country generally has primarily one community. All open societies have different movements in them and different subcultures in them, and we'll talk about that in a minute because it's really, really important. But in general, a community is characterized by a group of individuals who have rapport with each other, who have a shared sense of values, a shared reality. They have the same villains. They share the same heroes, villains, problems, solutions, and values. And if you want to destroy that community, what you need to do is crack them apart using ideology and into two communities and get them, the first community can stay as it was. The second community needs to be told that there's a different ideology, and in that ideology, everything is upside down. So where in one half of the country you have the police are trusted heroes, the other half of the country needs to fear the police and resent them and feel that they're corrupt. And same thing with politicians, that you want some people to trust the government, you want at least half the people to not trust the government. Some people might trust FBI investigations as reliable sources of truth. The other half of society thinks that the FBI is corrupt and isn't going to be telling them the truth. So in that way, you crack the society apart and you get them to argue with each other basically about ideology. Who is the hero here? Who's the villain? And that's another reason why we can see today why active measures is so obviously happening is with any narrative that comes about, you see immediately the exact opposite narrative coming up. So where Bill Gates is, held by some people to be some kind of hero of global health, contributing to the World Health Organization and dealing with vaccines or whatever, I don't honestly know what he's dealing with exactly in Africa. But, some people really appreciate him as a global mover in terms of human health and well-being. And so immediately you have another narrative come in that he's basically the Antichrist and that all the work he's doing has actually destroyed countless lives. And he has some kind of an agenda to destroy more lives, destroy your life, destroy human dignity, freedom, well-being. So in the same way we have...
I wanted to look at that a little bit more because we have these major polarities that are fracturing our society.
Yeah.
So the one that just started, I guess, back with Reagan. How do you see that one, that polarity? But it seems, I watched The Family, which is on Netflix. It's about this culture that divided the country, and they made two main issues which would connect the group together, which were the two factions were what a definition of a real family. It couldn't be two same-sex people marrying each other, and so demonizing, bisexual and gay and lesbian people. And the other main issue that seemed to unite people was the abortion issue, and those got anchored with the Christian movement. And then The Family said they had like a little code word system. All you need is Jesus. And so no matter what religion you were unified under, well, we're not talking about the Bible, we're talking about Jesus. And it was brilliant psychological manipulation. And that seemed to really get anchored in with Reagan. So you notice that all the presidents have to have some kind of church they're going to, except something's changed because we don't see Trump going to church anymore. But all the other ones, they go to be mindful and respectful, especially they would attend funerals, those types of things. And they're always there, going to the breakfast prayer meeting, which is international. So anyway, I'm going to pass it to you, but do you think that's really the beginning of that first phase in your documentation? Was about around the Reagan administration?
Oh, okay. Right. So he does play a very strong role in where we've come to today, obviously. We couldn't be where we are today without Ronald Reagan and without the culture that grew around him in D.C., including things like The Family dictating really an ideology or a dogma around what is a real family or what is God's view of abortion, which are just, they're just ideologies that you can use to create power struggle and arguments, and you can, increase those arguments over decades. But Reagan was elected on a platform called government is actually the problem. Government's never the solution. Government's always the problem. So that right there, if you study active measures a while, that just rings like a massive billboard, a flashing billboard. This is active measures. This is a twisted ideology, because there's really no place in modern responsible discourse for a president of the most powerful country in the world to say the government is always the problem. It's just, no one wants government to be bloated and to be larger than it needs to be in order to take good care of the people. We can all find common ground there and be in the same community in that desire. But we also want the government to do, to provide what it is proper for the government to provide. But when you come with such a sharp ideology that government is always the problem, it's an obvious twisting of a really good faith idea, which is the good faith conservative history is actually has a lot of wisdom to it, if you ask me, but it's been weaponized because it's been twisted into this caricature of itself. And around that caricature, you can get a really strong sense of tribalism. Another thing that grew up in Reagan's D.C. at the time was something called Americans for Tax Reform, which was headed by Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist got pretty much everyone who was running for office, or at least all the conservatives for sure, to sign a pledge saying that they were not going to raise taxes without cutting taxes in another area, so that there would never be a raising of taxes. And that also is a really good idea, but you can twist that idea in order to weaponize it. And another thing that he said, which I think really betrays what he was really all about, is he said, ironically, started out the quote by saying, I don't want to destroy the government, right? Which kind of tells you what he was really wanting to do, if you ask me. He said, I don't want to destroy the government, I just want to make it small enough so that I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub. So that kind of gives you an idea of what he might have actually probably been wanting to do at this point, now that we can see from, with 2020 hindsight. So with those markers of twisted ideology that really don't have any real place in responsible public discourse, we can imagine that they were using those ideologies in order to create polarization. Yeah.
And then you also see that there's this trickle-down economics began
Yes.
eradication of the middle class, that we've been able to identify. Yes. It definitely doesn't work. The middle class has suffered, is almost gone. Okay, so what would you like to say about that?
I am so glad that you reminded me of that, because that is an incredibly important aspect of that dogma of the government is always the problem and we should never raise taxes. And people who, and also what Reagan said is he had this narrative that is so, it's kind of violence, I think, against the lower classes. He had this narrative of welfare queens who were driving around in Cadillacs and, which really inspires hatred against people who are really, who are completely powerless in society, and really assigning blame for anything that doesn't work onto the people who are most powerless to really, have any impact on anything and to defend themselves.
Yeah,
but
victims. The victim, yeah.
Yeah. The victim is, I could get into that for a little while, but the victim is usually, Republican, the Republican base. And the perpetrators are really everybody else. But with the voodoo economics that, George H.W. Bush coined that term in one of the primary debates against Ronald Reagan, you see the birth of that idea, which is so alive still today. And it has driven Republican national economic policy forever, even though pretty much everyone who wants to tell the truth about it says that it's complete nonsense and it's actually destroying the middle class. The Republicans, obviously, they passed a massive tax cut for the wealthiest among us in the first 2 years of the Donald Trump presidency. And it's almost like, it is exactly like they try to forward something that has been debunked decades ago, but they just ignore the best evidence against the things that they are putting forth. And no one can actually force them to address the fact that it doesn't work and it's actually hurt the middle class desperately. So when they say, we are going to be helping the middle class by implementing trickle-down economics, that's an ideology. It's just an idea. And when you attach the ideology to the actions you take, you can actually get away with doing a lot of things that are really hurtful to people, and people just kind of trust you to not be doing it on purpose. But since active measures, one of the core techniques of active measures is deny, even when the truth is obvious, you actually never have to account for the fact that you're ignoring a mountain of evidence that lets everybody know that what you're doing is actually very, very destructive to the country. And you can get away with almost anything. When you do that, you can get away with arming, militias with weapons of war. And the list goes on and on.
I saw a movie back in the 60s, and this man was caught in bed cheating on his wife. And he used that strategy. He kept denying. So he got up and his mistress was there, and they made the bed quietly, and then the mistress grabbed her clothes and ran out of the room, and he's talking to his wife like everything's normal and there's nothing wrong. And then he makes bed and sits down on it, and he just starts talking to his wife, and then she's left wondering, did I just make that up? Was I hallucinating? How could he possibly act like nothing happened? She wanted to be all right, irate, and divorce him, and he's just, so I guess that's what we call gaslighting. He just denied her reality. That was in the 60s, so that was before this document was released. So, who created this? This has been going on for a while, but that was brilliant.
Yes, it's been going on for a very long time. What Yuri Bezmenov says is that trying to trick the masses into doing things that are against their best interests is a project that is as old as civilization itself. And I think that's very accurate. It's really up to the masses to take very good care of themselves and not be duped into doing things that aren't good for them, and really to not trust our government, honestly. And when you have Trump supporters who just trust that Donald Trump is telling the truth, and they don't check what he says against countervailing evidence, you have a recipe for destruction of any democracy, and that's what we have now. I just want to say also, around the Ronald Reagan time, there was something that was created called the Council for National Policy, which is an incredibly powerful right-wing kind of a think tank. And it was created by this guy, Paul Weyrich, who is called the father of modern conservatism. He co-founded the Heritage Foundation, and he also founded another organization called the Free Congress Foundation. The Free Congress Foundation created a manifesto under his leadership, and the manifesto is also linked, will be linked from the documents linked from this recording. But that document, what's really lets me know that this is an active measures process, or one of the many, many things that really lets me know. But this is one of the four foundational documents that I think will point out to most people, if they read them and look at them, that I'm telling you an accurate story. Three of those documents, of course, are the Yuri Bezmenov documents, and the other document is the manifesto that came from the father of modern conservatism. And when you read that manifesto about the techniques that they're going to use to forward their goals were really fundamental societal change, because they were, at least, what they're known to be is related to Dominionist Christians, right? Dominionist Christians want a Christian state. They're not happy with the separation of church and state. They're not happy that other religions get to have equal rights as Christian churches. So when you look at that manifesto, you can see that their organization was basically saying we're going to be using active measures techniques and tactics in order to achieve our goals, and including we're going to tear society down before we're going to build it up. So that is a demoralization process in the active measures world. But what they said is basically that we're going to tear society down before we build it up. Another thing they said was we're going to pretend, basically we're going to appear to be passive, but we're going to be actually very aggressive. And so that is the use of front groups to do your work. Fake tanks, fake media outlets that seem to have one agenda, which is just to forward, decent human society, but whose actual goal is to demoralize people and to give them a false narrative. And also to manipulate and leverage people's innate desire for group belonging into getting their goals accomplished, which is basically creating tribalism and using psychological manipulation against the people to get into arguments with each other. So the important thing about that is Steve Bannon actually came out and said, darkness is good. Dick Cheney, Darth Vader, Satan. That's power. It only helps us when they get it wrong, when they're blind to who we are and what we're doing. And basically what he's saying in that incredible quote that's all over the internet, you can find it in dozens of places, is we're part of a conspiracy, right? He's saying that. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy. Steve Bannon is saying there's a conspiracy. And Yuri Bezmenov obviously was saying there are many, many conspiracies going on using these tactics. But Steve Bannon said they don't know who we are or what we're doing. He's admitting, I'm part of a conspiracy, and nobody knows who we are. Nobody knows what we're doing. But he said, we're manipulating people's enemy images. We're getting people to hate other Americans like Dick Cheney and to think that those people are evil. And when we do that, we achieve our goals. And that whole picture, to tie it all together, the manifesto was created by Paul Weyrich's organization, Free Congress Foundation. Paul Weyrich also founded, around the time that Ronald Reagan was just first in office, the Council for National Policy. Steve Bannon is a member of the National Council for National Policy. So is Kellyanne Conway. So is Jerome Corsi, who is the source of the entire birtherism disinformation campaign. And so is Tom Fitton, who is the head of Judicial Watch, and he's been on Fox News, I want to say, countless times. So this is a lot of disinformation coming out of a conservative think tank that was created by a person whose previous organization basically came out and said, we are going to be using active measures techniques to tear society down before we recreate society on a fundamental level in our own image. And this, one last thing I want to say in this share is that Yuri Bezmenov says in every open society, when the USSR looks at a country and they want to take over a country, they want to either invade it or create a civil war so that they can install their own people. Every open society has all kinds of movements. There are pro-police movements, anti-police movements, like court reform movements, movements to pass certain constitutional amendments, what have you. They're moving all over the place. And what you want to do is you want to find those movements that are already in the country that actually hate their own country and they want to destroy their own country. And there are two groups who in the United States who are just really, I think, fantastic candidates for participation in such a process. One is Dominionist Christians who want to create a Christian state. And the other group is white supremacists. So Steve Bannon is obviously the ex-CEO of Breitbart.com, which has very, very strong relationship with the alt-right. And there were emails that were leaked by various people related with Breitbart.com. And they say that Steve Bannon was very supportive of certain alt-right ideas. And alt-right is just a watered down dog whistle for white supremacy. And let's not mince words. White supremacists want a white state or many white states, and they want to kill anybody who gets in their way. I mean, this is kind of, let's just be straight with it. So if you have people who are kind of, they are associated with these kind of people, they are extraordinarily dangerous. And I don't want anyone to think that because they're called alt-right, they're somehow some kind of watered down version. The word is watered down. The actual intention and intent is not. And I think we should all trust that.
Okay. So what I find amazing, it's not that they, that the top down people are, they have these policies, but that our people buy it so readily. It's like they're mind controlled.
Yeah.
Do you have any insights on that? How are they so mind controlled so easily?
Right. Well, so in 1970, Yuri Bezmenov, I hope I didn't cut you off, by the way. You kind of...
You did great. Keep going. Thanks.
Oh, okay. So in 1970, you can imagine how little relative to right now was known about how to psychologically manipulate people. And when he was alive, what he was talking about was the end of the demoralization phase, the first phase of active measures. The goal of that phase is to have a population whose perception of reality is so distorted that they can't take reasonable actions to protect themselves, their families, their communities, or their country. That's one way to put it. Another way that he put it was to distort their perception of reality such that they cannot hear the truth no matter how much evidence is presented to them. So what he said is you can show them concentration camps in the Soviet Union and they will not believe it. It doesn't matter what you show them. And so in those days, they could accomplish that goal. You can imagine how well they accomplish the goal these days. And they do it by constantly saying the other side is lying and things like that and creating tribalism. Like there's a war on Christmas. There's a war, on what you hold sacred. you're on God's side. The other side wants to destroy everything that's dignified and beautiful in the human condition and society. And over decades, they do this, right? So it's not a short process. And so every time they receive one of those messages and believe the message, it's just like chipping away a little bit at the public psyche. And so it's a legitimate process. They say things from media outlets, and these are just legitimate communications. Oh, there's a war on Christmas, from a certain point of view. It's like, oh, this person is really experiencing that and really is concerned about that. But when you hear such messages that really invoke tribal mind in the listeners, then you can understand that they probably don't really believe that. They're just kind of hyping drama in order to create tribalism. I've kind of lost my train. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Oh yeah.
Debra,
So anyway,
so
I'm sorry. What it was okay. The demoralization phase has been finished, and so we see the Trump supporters. They don't even look at the 19,000 or so assertions by the Washington Post that Donald Trump has lied. They don't even look at them. They don't even examine the evidence, and so that's what you want if you want to create this kind of never-ending increase in power struggle. You want one side to just completely go on trust. And so you can actually accomplish this by leveraging the fact that there are certain people in society who are what is called authoritarian personality types. And these personality types, they believe in following a trusted authority. They believe in punishing people who are, not cooperating or who are undermining the goals of the trusted authority. And they also have a quality which is called cognitive, a lack of cognitive effort. So these people can be completely 100% trusted to never, quote unquote, read the transcript. You can ask them to read the transcript 100 times, and you can trust that they will never actually do it. Even if they did it, they probably wouldn't be able to understand the implications of what was in it. So the interesting thing about this is when you realize, okay, there are all these people in society, they don't go around wearing name badges or anything, you can't really tell who they are. But if you act in a certain kind of way, you can actually magnetize these people and get them to all kind of move and gravitate in your direction. So for decades, the Republican Party has played a certain kind of a role, right? It's all drama and theater, but what they've played is the role of kind of the narcissistic, strongman leader who never apologizes, never compromises, who punishes enemies in extra legal ways, like they torture them, they jail them in Guantanamo Bay without trial for the rest of their lives. And there is a certain kind of person that really appeals to them. They don't have empathy for the people who are in Guantanamo Bay. They don't have empathy for people who might be waterboarded or picked up in Canada and then shipped off to a Syrian dark site to be tortured. They don't really care about those people. They want protection for themselves and their family at any cost, even if it's outside the rule of law. So by acting in a certain way, over decades, they have been able to gather all of these authoritarian personality types into the Republican Party. And as a matter of fact, by certain social scientists who've studied this, have claimed that they basically constitute their own third party, right? Which is kind of chilling for me, actually. But that's how you get a whole bunch of people who are just following what you say without checking it, without using any of the filters that other people might be using to be skeptical that what you're saying might not be true. These other people might hear something that they doubt and then go check it out for themselves. These people are probably never going to be doing that work. They're focusing on other things in their lives. And quite frankly, they haven't been educated to be able to understand things like the Attorney General is supposed to be a neutral, nonpartisan figure. And when people complain that Bill Barr is too much Donald Trump's personal lawyer, they don't really understand what that means. They don't understand that it's a valid complaint.
Great. Okay, Debra, any thoughts? How you doing?
I'm here. Sorry. Not yet, because I want him to flesh this out a little bit more, and then I will have some questions. I do have one question, though. Is this, because this was, I think you mentioned this last night in our conversation. Were we responsible for active measures that broke up Russia?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Yeah, so the Soviet Union was broken up in the 90s. I can't remember the specific year. It might have been 1991. One day there was a Soviet Union and the next day there wasn't. And it was kind of a shocking thing, I think, for at least from the media that I had seen, that suddenly there was a giant shift in geopolitics. So that's extremely suspicious for me. That kind of thing doesn't really happen on its own, is my understanding of human behavior. But it does happen if you have an active measures campaign that is applied to a country. So there are a lot of different ways to describe active measures. One is to get your enemy to say what you want them to say. Another is to take over a country without firing a single shot, is kind of the ideal. And when you think about the KGB, if they wanted to take over the Soviet Union, if they wanted to take over Russia anyway, you would basically see exactly what you did see. You would see them take over without firing a single shot. And what do you have now? You have essentially President for life, Vladimir Putin, who is a KGB agent. So that's what I would expect to see if the KGB decided they were not happy sharing power. They probably took over more or less the rest of the world, and they were like, what are we going to do now? And they were like, okay, well, we could take over this place too. And they probably did exactly that. And when I think about that, I think about the United States, obviously, and I think about an active measures campaign that's definitely being supported and forwarded by Steve Bannon. You know, he's an American citizen. Other people, you know, who are really high on the list, you know, are Americans, you know. And so I imagine there might be collusion between what was going on in the KGB and what is going on, I think, definitely in the CIA.
What do you think makes somebody turn like that against their own country?
Well, I guess I've thought about that a bit, and I'm imagining that white supremacy is a really strong driver, because it's so obviously around in our media and in our consciousness. Actually, there was a sitting U.S. senator who yesterday tweeted out essentially support for an outright white nationalist on Twitter. That is, I believe her first name is Kelly Loeffler. She was not elected, but she was appointed by the governor of Georgia to be a senator of Georgia. You might know her because she had some scandal around selling some stock when she heard that COVID was going to happen. So she tweeted out support of another verified Twitter account who has tweeted out some white supremacist messages. I don't know if you're familiar with the number 14 or the number 88 or together 1488. But these are dog whistles. They're not really thin dog whistles at this point. They're very well-known dog whistles for supporting white supremacy code. You know, it's code word for white supremacy. And she supported him on Twitter yesterday. So this is really in the highest levels of our government. It's like right there in our faces. And so when I think about the Cold War and two essentially Caucasian countries or Caucasian-controlled countries fighting against themselves or each other for domination of the world, I think that maybe one of them woke up, or both of them woke up one day and they said, you know, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to actually be on the same side as this person. I'm not really convinced by the ideology of either side, and I'm just into power. And there must be a very sick and dark non-recognition of the dignity of the human experience and the human person, because to demoralize a country or a planet is a very dark business. And so anyway, those are my thoughts about that.
Well, it just makes makes you think they're not human? Because
I didn't say that they're not human. I meant to say that they were psychopaths or sociopaths or narcissists who don't have empathy.
That seems inhuman. You know, I'm into ufology. We say how reptilian or draconian or it's not even human. It's hard for good human beings to imagine somebody being so psychopathic that they would even walk through the world in that way and think that way, right? So it's really hard for people to go, how could somebody be a traitor to humanity, be a traitor to the earth, be a traitor to the, life itself? And yet here we find these people and they're signing documentation to destroy the wilderness, to, destroy the planet with all this pollution, and they're just doing it willingly, and it's just mind-boggling.
Right.
Anyway,
well, there's two levels though. What you're describing is the show level, right? That's on stage. What you're describing with destroying the wilderness and destroying the oceans, and that's part of the play that's being put on for our benefit. What I'm describing is actually what's going on behind the stage. That we have all these conspiracy theories that are everywhere, right? We have countless theories on everything, but where is the very sensible conspiracy theory that these active measures process has been trained on the United States? It's a conspicuous missing topic of conversation, if you ask me. But what you're talking about, the on-stage being actually people playing roles and doing things that are actually evil, right? That people look at them and they think, I am enraged, I'm outraged by that. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Those kinds of acts, like, having children die in U.S. custody in concentration camps or, those kinds of things, they are actually evil. But once you have a really tight tribe who is just going to follow you basically to the gates of hell if you tell them to, and they're going to throw away their lives, if you tell them to go to war, they're going to happily do it for you because they're such a strong followership. You can get away with being evil, which just outrages the other side. And that's what Steve Bannon was saying when he said darkness is good. It only helps us when they get it wrong, when they don't know who we are or what we're doing. And so it is pretty outrage-inducing to have children die in U.S. custody and have apparently nothing being done about it. But that outrage, and this is kind of maybe moving into the view of like solutions a little bit, which I'd like to offer some solutions. But what Yuri Bezmenov said was really spirituality is the way to combat this entire situation. And so the outrage that people feel naturally when they see the climate being destroyed or human lives being destroyed by the state, that outrage has a place in human activity, obviously, but then it's time to feel that outrage when it comes up, and then it's time to clear one's head and address the situation in a mature adult way from a spirit of availability and, kind of our more grown-up parts. But if we're all outraged all the time and we're all off-center all the time and we're all living in a drama, some kind of drama all the time, which is helped by not only these stories that invoke outrage, but also by the fact that the economy has been working against the middle class and the lower class for decades, and a lot of people are really struggling. They don't have a lot of time to find the ease that they might need in order to center themselves. But with genuine spirituality and religion, we can find that peace of mind that we can actually empathize with people and we can actually cooperate and collaborate and apply really sensible solutions to our problems instead of just struggling, and trying to apply really ineffective solutions like power struggle when they obviously haven't been working, and we just keep on applying the same failed strategies and solutions that are going to continue to fail predictably. We really need to have some new solutions, and in order to have those new solutions, we have to be with clear-mindedness and presence, and we get that through spirituality. What Yuri Bezmenov said is, you can't fight against this process through normal means, through missiles or through trying to attack directly. You need to attack it or fight back with the power of spiritual power or moral superiority. And he says if you don't have those qualities, it's high time to develop them. And he said it's the only way. That's what he said is the only way.
Well, we're coming up with the first break here in just a minute, and we're going to be back. So where are we going to go in the second hour? Give us some previews. Where you want to go? Take our listeners.
Well, I can go through many of the hallmarks of the demoralization process, and we can kind of compare what Yuri Bezmenov said were the goals of active measures, and we can compare them to what we see in American society. And the idea would be if they line up pretty strongly, which I think most people will be able to recognize that they do, then we can be in a shared reality around the idea that an active measures campaign is well underway in the United States. That's one major thing. I'd like to also talk about our broken media model and how that contributes to the situation. And I'd like to talk about the communication patterns of narcissists and how they are used to trick people, because narcissists have certain tactics that they use, and they work. And we have these blind spots, and they work. And so if we can know what those tactics are, we can actually have some defenses to them.
That sounds great. So we're going to be doing that. We come back, and our music should be coming in any second. And what is the name of your website where people can check you out?
Thank you. There's a website. There's a website that I've devoted to this. It's kind of a blog, and I'll post more things there. I just started it, so there's little there now, but there will be much more there in the future. It's called peaceful.ly. Peaceful.ly. It's peacefully.
Peacefully. Wonderful. Alrighty. So we're still waiting for the music. What else would we like to say? We got like 30 seconds, 20 seconds. What about your... Oh, here's the music. Okay, we'll pick this up in about 4 minutes. Please mute. Right.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning, warning.
We've got to stop them! They're going to kill us all! See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you're so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. All right, thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back, everybody. Not sure what happened to Miss Janet, but she'll be here in a second.
No, I'm talking with my mic muted again. I'm not used to having to be quiet in between on the commercials. Anyway, I'm back. I'm Janet Kira Lessin, and of course you heard Debra DeFranco, and this is the Sacred Matrix, and then we are on Revolution Radio, Studio B, and our guest is James Tolley. But before we get back to our show, which is very, very interesting, I would like to remind you to go over to that donation button on revolution.radio, and up at the top there's a left side, a tab, it's called a tab. On the left side, at the top, you can make your one-time donation there, and then there's a Patreon button in the center, and you can set up a recurring donation. And we really thank you very much for your donations, because you help us keep the show on the air, and we appreciate that. We like doing this. Yeah. So, Debra, before we bring back James, any comments? Anything you want to add? What you want to see this last hour? You there? Hello? Am I by myself? Uh-oh.
Did we lose James?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay. So go ahead, James. Pick up where you left off, and we're all ears. We're excited about the second half.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were asking me to start. I must have been confused.
I was asking Debra to say something before you came back on, but that's okay. Whatever works.
Okay. I've just been checking in with how, if I'm on track. Thank you. So I guess I would like to start by one topic that I really love to talk about is the communication patterns of narcissists and how they are used in active measures campaigns, because humans have all kinds of cognitive kind of blind spots, and if you know what they are, you can use them to manipulate people. And we see like visual things, tricks of the eye. We're kind of familiar with them. I think a lot of people are, and these would be tricks that aren't as easy to see, but once you actually see them, they're quite obvious to see. So there's one overarching technique which is called DARVO. It's an acronym, DARVO, and that has been used for decades in political speech to trick people and to distract them. And it's used by narcissists, right? So narcissists use these techniques because they have needs, and they use these to win. They use these techniques because they work. They use these techniques because they work against people. And I'm so sorry. I think there might be something wrong with my mic. If you can hang on one sec. So I'm going to continue. So narcissists are riddled with shame. They feel soul-crushing shame pretty much all the time, and they feel very inferior to everyone else, and they don't want to show that. They don't want to admit it, and they do all kinds of things in order to avoid actually addressing it or bringing it up in conversation. So what they do is they brag about themselves. They paint themselves as superhuman. They have superhuman abilities, magical abilities. But really what they're doing is they're hiding. They're hiding in plain sight. It's like, most of us, when we feel shame, we kind of go into the margins. But narcissists get like center stage, and for some reason, they feel safer in center stage lying to people and manipulating them instead of kind of, being in the sidelines and not being seen. So I guess they have a stronger fear of not being seen than being seen in some kind of a way, if you understand what I'm saying. So in order to hide what they're doing, they use tricks in order to distract people, to emotionally destabilize them, and in order to get them, the people around them in their lives, to adopt worldviews that are actually wrong. Right? So a good example of this that I like to use is, let's say there's a narcissist. They're in a relationship with another person who's probably codependent, otherwise they wouldn't be with a narcissist. And the narcissist, in order to, destabilize the other person, in order to feel safe or feel that they are superhuman and they can break boundaries without paying any price, they might flirt at a party. And so they might flirt with someone else at the party while their partner is with them. And if there's feedback, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to do anything about that. So
James,
yes.
Unplug your headset. Can
Okay.
you speak right into your computer? It's
Yeah,
your
I can.
headset. Oh, that's so much better. Your
wow,
headset.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's your headset. I think it's great. You sound fabulous now.
I did not think that was possibly the problem, but okay. Thank you. So the narcissist will intentionally break boundaries in order to kind of test their limits and pretend that they are not a normal person that has to abide by social norms and things like that. And so let's say a narcissist flirts with someone else at a party. Their partner comes and says, "You were flirting with that person." Immediately, the narcissist will employ DARVO. So they will deny that it happened. They'll say, like, "No, I wasn't flirting with them. I was just laughing at them." And then they will attack the other person. That's the A in DARVO. So DARVO, again, is deny, attack, and reverse victim and oppressor. So they'll deny it. No, I wasn't. And then they'll attack the other person. They'll say something like, "You're just so oversensitive. There's something wrong with you. You make things up, and then you make mountains out of molehills." And then they will play the victim suddenly. So instead of being the perpetrator who is actually breaking the agreements with their partner, or at least pushing the boundaries of their agreements in a way that didn't feel good to their partner, they suddenly play the victim role and they cast their partner as the perpetrator. So it's a reality upside down kind of a thing. Reality upside down is a very classic active measures technique. So they say basically they cast the roles in exactly the opposite way than they really are. So they play the victim, they cast the perpetrator role on their partner, and they say, "I don't even know if I like you anymore," right? Which is a very triggering thing, abandoning thing to say to your partner. And then that emotionally destabilizes the partner. So gaslighting is in there, lying is in there, and blame shifting is in there. It's really, the DARVO is more of like a catch-all for all these other techniques that are also used. So the amazing thing about DARVO is, and reality upside down, and deny, even when the truth is obvious, these are all narcissist patterns that are used. These can be used and are used in active measures campaigns against large groups of people through the use in mass media. So to give one example of this, which is kind of a classic also from way back, Newt Gingrich was once upon a time not a very well-known public figure, although he was in the House of Representatives. He wasn't really a household name. So what he did is he would go on C-SPAN in the early days of C-SPAN late at night when there was no one in the House chamber, and he would just talk, and they would broadcast it to the nation on C-SPAN. And he played a little trick, right? He was very ambitious. He wanted to get something done. And so what he did is he was extremely combative and argumentative and shaming and blaming of his Democratic colleagues in the House. And this bothered a lot of people, including this House Speaker, Tip O'Neill, who was a Democrat. And so Tip O'Neill, when chambers were in session again and the entire House was in the House chambers talking about this, Tip O'Neill took the microphone and said that something very reasonable for a human being to say. He said, you were casting people in a bad light, and I've never heard any Congress member do that in my 34 years in Congress. And when he said that, that statement that he said was actually against the rules of the House. So you can't really disparage the character of another House member while on the House floor. But there was nobody there to say that Newt Gingrich had broken the House rules. But you break the House rules, and then when you're called on it, you actually play the victim and say that the other person is the perpetrator. And so what they did was that. They said, Tip O'Neill, your words are against the House rules. We're going to do something called take your words down, which means strike them from the record. And when he did that, that was like, that event made national news. It was in every major paper. It was an incredibly seismic earthquake on the national public scene, and it made Newt Gingrich's national career happen. And he obviously went on to become Speaker of the House. He basically broke Congress. He's famous for having broken Congress because he destroyed all the bipartisan, rapport and empathy and understanding and cooperation and collaboration between the parties. He forbid House Republicans from having dinner with their Democratic colleagues, for example. He did a lot of things. Anyway, it can all be kind of characterized as breaking Congress. But the amazing thing about Newt Gingrich, and I'm happy we're speaking about him, because he is a real pivotal figure. There was an article, I think it was in 2018 in November in The Atlantic, where the author of the article is saying, when we look at the international wreckage of international institutions and, people's faith in their own governments across Europe and in the United States, Newt Gingrich is actually gleeful when he surveys that wreckage, and he realizes that he can draw a direct line from the work that he did in Congress to what he's seeing now on the national stage or on the global stage. And when the journalist asks him, and that's a good thing, Newt Gingrich had said, everywhere you have freedom, you have a strong distrust that the system isn't working. And because of his glee, the author of the article, the journalist, said, and that's a good thing? And Newt Gingrich in response said, it's essential if you want Western civilization to survive. So Western civilization, in case you're not aware, is a dog whistle for white supremacy. And the way that we know that is because Iowa Congressman Steve King said white supremacy, white nationalism, Western civilization. When did these words become so taboo? He said something like that. That was quoted in the New York Times. And it was after that Steve King's committee appointments were negated and nullified. He was kicked out of all of his committees in the House. So, Newt Gingrich is a very, very pivotal figure in all of this, obviously. And if you see the decades-long process where now we have so much divisiveness, people can't even go home for the holidays and have a decent conversation about politics with their distant relatives. That is not normal, but you can build it over a long period of time by constantly escalating the power struggle and division in society. And Newt Gingrich was a pivotal figure in that decades ago. One of the things that he was quoted as having said in 1985, was it 1985? Might have been 1995 now. I apologize. My memory is not always great. But what he said, and he was quoted in a New York Times article, he said, I have a tremendous, enormous personal ambition. I want to change the planet, and I'm doing it. This is just the beginning of a 20 or 30 year process. So, the clues are just really out there if you take a look at them. They're not that complicated to take a look at. So anyway, that's Darvo and a little bit more history from decades ago. Are there any questions about that?
I've always suspected that Newt Gingrich was at the heart of this because I remember when him and Bob Dole sat up there on TV with a golf club making fun of the Clinton administration and just acting like 5-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what I find so hilarious about this is Newt Gingrich is the biggest hypocrite that has ever walked the planet. He left his wife for his assistant, who he has since married, and she is now the ambassador to the Vatican, which
Right.
I find just the biggest hypocritical placement possible of this administration.
Right, right. Yeah, Newt Gingrich ran for president in 2000. And in the primaries, and I think it was the first presidential primary for the Republican, the first presidential debate for the Republicans during their primary on CNN, Newt Gingrich, it was pretty much in the press. Like, Newt Gingrich was married 3 times. I think he asked one of his wives to have an open relationship with him. And, the Family Values Party didn't all think that was super wonderful. They weren't very happy with him. So the CNN moderator said, as the first question of the debate, something like, what's up with that? Like, why do you get to be the nominee for president for the party of family values when you have this history? And he employed Darvo, although he didn't deny it, right? So the thing about Darvo, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to do all the steps. Sometimes it's implied that you deny it. But if you don't want to address it at all, you do something like what he said, which is, I can't believe that you just asked in a presidential debate that you had the gall to ask such an offensive question to start out the debate, which is just an absurd thing to be upset about. But the thing that I actually remember watching that debate years ago, and the reason I remember it is because the audience's applause when he said that were so unnatural to me. They were extremely enthusiastic, as if he had just championed something like heaven itself, and it was just so it just didn't make sense to me at all. But when you go back and you watch, or you see the transcript of it, or you listen to him, it's Darvo. Yeah. And the thing about it is, the real reason I want to talk about Darvo is because people hear it all the time in political speech. They don't recognize it for what it is. But once you recognize it, and once you know the pattern, you can recognize it all over the place. But if you don't actually recognize the pattern, it can be used 100,000 times, and it'll always work on you, because you'll just think the other person is being authentic in their outrage, and you'll want to this is one of the blind spots of human activity. And actually, you can look at this book by Malcolm Gladwell called Listening to Strangers, where people have such a strong desire to trust the people around them, even if they don't know who they are, even if they're strangers. There's a strong desire to trust them, or a strong impulse, or a strong kind of predisposition to trusting them. So when you get Kellyanne Conway doing things like saying, that there's alternative facts to that, that's basically what Darvo is all about. It's not about never creating a shared reality with the person who's interviewing you or speaking with you, always creating an alternate reality, always be doing competition with the other person, right? So narcissists are in constant states of competition with the people in their lives. They don't want to be seen, and they use all these techniques in order to do it. And you can see them be used by Kellyanne Conway and Newt Gingrich and other people. So I would love for everyone to know about that right away. That would really change our world in a good way. So I could just go on and talk about some of the tactics and goals, especially during the demoralization phase of active measures.
Yes, that's very important.
Yeah, great. So there is you can look at this yourself. It's linked from the site peaceful.ly.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Before we go on, I did have a question. I'm sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize somehow I got muted. Okay, so I'm watching a show called The Politician. They have a woman that is running for some higher office out of the local New York office, and she's actively in a polyamorous relationship. And they decided to use this technique that instead of denying it, she came out to say, well, I'm a modern woman, and I'm an empowered woman, and I only have one, I have 2 men in my life. And they turned it around to, it's like they're changing in the consciousness of the planet or something by, like what you said, good is bad, bad is good, right? So, traditionally they're going, one man, one woman, right? So now they're going the other direction, and then people don't know what to think. Like same with COVID, not COVID, and masks and not masks, and vaccine, not vaccine. They seem to make both sides good or bad, and the poor person in the middle is going, I don't know what to believe. I don't know how to act anymore. I don't know which direction to go. Have you noticed that? Because that's what was on this television show, and it's like, wow. And then you're talking about Newt Gingrich said he wanted to be in an open relationship, and then what's wrong with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, he didn't say that what was wrong with it, but I get that this show did that. They reframed it basically to characterize them as heroes. Yeah.
Right, and I'm not taking sides on that one way or the other, but because I know people in polyamorous, and I know people that are gay and lesbian, and I know trans, and I know, the whole range of people. I'm a relationship counselor, so I work with everybody. But I'm noticing that they're using that as a technique to manipulate humanity, and it seems to be going away from that original argument, which was family values, which it was outlined in that the family document, 5-part documentary series. So, are they changing strategies? Or are they just adding more confusion, or more polarities, more opportunities for people to get into their tribes and against the other ones? What do you think's going on there, James?
I'd say all of the above. Yeah, all of the above. There's a hyperactivity about the current situation, I think, because of the stage that we're in, where it's not a slow burn anymore. It's really a boiling point where there are, for every single idea that comes into the public mind, there has to be immediately something that says 180 degrees the other thing, which is why, for example, COVID comes and people are told to wear masks, and so immediately wearing masks makes you an idiot in some circles. You're kind of equating being a sheep with wearing a mask. And on the other side, if you don't wear a mask, then you are endangering public health, or whatever it is. There's two sides and they don't like each other, and things are kind of boiled down to these caricatures of human qualities. Instead of seeing an individual, you just see kind of a caricature of a person. And that's very, very important if you want to break down human relationships, which is one of the most essential parts of active measures. If we are in good communication with one another, just as a community, we have strong religion, we have strong boundaries, we have strong communication, that is not a susceptible community for active measures. But if you have people, so what you want to do if you have that situation, slowly growing a community that just sees each other as caricatures and doesn't have really a lot of close relationships with each other, you insert ideology between human relationships or dogma, and you insert bureaucracy in between human relationships. So ideology is obvious, right? So if someone is wearing a Make America Great Again hat, someone either sees them just as a caricature, right? You see someone on the street, they're either a friend or an enemy. That's it. And so, you just kind of paint everybody with a broad brush, and you don't really see them as people. You don't have any real empathy on a deep level with them. And dogma the same way. Dogma, ideology, similar, but and then bureaucracy, right? If you have big brother government, and this is what Yuri Bezmenov says about the big brother government that did exist in the USSR when he defected, but when you look at No Child Left Behind, right? It seems like a very counterintuitive thing for a Republican administration. It was brought about in the Department of Education of the George W. Bush administration. I thought, that's kind of a big brother thing where there's a centralized government and they're telling everybody what to teach. And I will be honest with you, I felt suspicious of it at the time because it didn't really make sense to me. And when I think about it now, in light of what Yuri Bezmenov says, I just see immediately that I'm not saying that it was done because of active measures. I obviously don't have any magical abilities in order to see inside the minds of other people, but what I do have is a reason, and I can see what happened, and I can see how it lines up with the description of the goals and the tactics of active measures, and I say that it lines up very, very well.
Because when you have a teacher who is no longer really in as direct a relationship with their students as they were before No Child Left Behind, they're more beholden to where they get their paycheck. They're more beholden to the gamification of the system that No Child Left Behind, a quota system that No Child Left Behind inserted in between human relationships. Actually, the child's relationship with the teacher is made less beautiful, less connected, and the teacher's relationship with the child, from their side, it's also less connected, because with everything that the child does, the teacher is tempted to consider that inside a filter called, how does that impact my paycheck? How does that impact my school? How does that impact Big Brother, looking over my shoulder at what I do and judging everything according to test scores? So it really does undermine human well-being when everything that a child does, you have to kind of consider whether or not it's going to add up in terms of the calculus of Big Brother.
James,
So, yes.
One of the things people don't realize about the No Child Left Behind Act, it was actually a business move by the Bush family. They launched a publication company that was owned by the family. And I don't know if you recall this, but they were actually issuing grants to schools to promote and build the program behind it. All the materials for the program were coming from this publishing company, and you didn't receive the grant unless you agreed to buy all of your materials from the publication company. So it was just a business move from the Bush family. And it may have been part of active measures, but it was also a part of their greed.
Yeah, you can, so to speak, kill two birds with one stone, do one thing and profit off it in different ways. But the George W. Bush administration, if you look back at that and you think about what they did during their phase of this decades-long process, you can find out pretty quickly some very obvious ways that they undermined faith in government. They promoted one of the key things about, if you want to destroy a government, you might as well get them into strong debt, decades of crushing debt. He was instrumental in starting a couple forever wars and increasing the deficit and things like that. So he had many things that he did that align with this process. But let me go through the subversion process. It's called ideological subversion as well, just to remind you. So if you have a community that's aligned in their heroes and their values, you want to subvert half of them. And so the demoralization process provides that. The demoralization process is the first phase of a 4-phase process, and it takes at least 15 years. And the second stage is destabilization, the third is crisis, and the fourth is where there's a new normal. It's called normalization. Very Orwellian term. So the different goals inside the demoralization process, how do you accomplish the demoralization of a community? You can, the first thing on the list is religion. So first you need to politicize, commercialize, and entertainmentalize religion. And the goal or the result of that process is death wish, called death wish, where you, instead of having a community that is well-centered, mature, able to address the public moment with a sense of availability and clear-headedness, you start to get people to get into neurotic patterns of coping mechanisms where they, if you go into like a 7-Eleven or a convenience store, this is something I noticed years ago on the mainland anyway. It's not as prevalent in Hawaii for me, but I have seen it in Hawaii as well. You see coping mechanisms are there on display. Cigarettes, alcohol, sugar, caffeine, fatty foods that are not good for you. It's basically, a shrine to coping mechanisms is how it occurs to me. So I think that has been accomplished, the politicization of religion and kind of the undermining of the well-being of American people. The second item on the list is education, and what you want to do is create ignorance. And how you do that is do things like No Child Left Behind, where you teach certain subjects and you do not teach other subjects. So right now we have about 33% of the American people are able to name the three branches of the federal government. That means 67% of American adults cannot name the three branches of the federal government, and that is like the minimum ability of understanding. If you're going to understand what's really going on, you have to understand that there are three branches of the federal government and what their roles are and why they're important and why they shouldn't be cooperating in the way that they have been cooperating in recent decades. So I would say that ignorance in the American population is also been accomplished. So the third item on the list is media. And this is one of the most important things for people to get in terms of a shift of people's consciousness due to hearing this message. This is probably number one in what I want people to walk away from this recording understanding. And what this comes straight from Yuri Bezmenov, and this comes from his pamphlet, Love Letter to America. You can look it up yourself. You can find it very easily on archive.org. So in terms of media, what you want as the result is you want uninformed myopia, right? Uninformed myopia, just confusion, not being able to see things clearly, not understanding things, not even knowing them. And the method to accomplish that is you monopolize the media. You also manipulate it, you discredit it, and you focus on non-issues. I'm going to leave monopolize for the last because that's the most important. But non-issues, according to Yuri Bezmenov, is things which have high costs or costs to the general population, but they're benefits to a small number of people. And I would, or things that the general population doesn't care about, but they're important to a small number of people. And there are two issues that I think are classic examples of non-issues. So that we've seen in recent years in the public mass media. But let's just consider the backdrop for a minute. The backdrop of American society is that we have a mass shooting epidemic. We have real problems. Economic problems and problems with violence. And these are real problems that should be addressed by our media and by our politicians, but they don't get addressed. We have climate change is apparently happening according to one of the media narratives. And that is also an urgent problem for people, and it never gets addressed. It never gets resolved. Those kinds of problems should be front burner problems, but instead the media focuses on divisive non-issues, issues that benefit a small number of people, but the majority of the population does not get any benefit from it. Two examples of that. One is the DACA conversation, where children of immigrants get to have a path to naturalization. It affects, I think, about 70,000 people. So that is an infinitesimally small number of people to be impacted. I might be wrong even by a factor of 10, but even 700,000 people in a population of 300+ million people, that's a non-issue. Okay, but it does divide us, and it's an emotional issue that people get outraged about. Another non-issue is who gets to use what bathroom. I don't want to undermine anybody's well-being. I want everybody to live a life of dignity. And it affects a small percentage of people compared to the general population. And while the building is burning, you generally don't worry about, kind of the decorations in the bathroom or something like that, or just a small issue when you have massive, massive problems. To give you an example, of the situation in terms of the crisis that we have, there was a Rasmussen poll. So Rasmussen is not the most trustworthy polling outfit on the face of the earth, but they came out with a poll saying that 31%, or it was 36% of Americans, this was in 2018, I believe, think that a civil war in America is at least likely, right? That is a raging bonfire of a problem, and it has not been addressed. It has not gotten better. It's gotten much, much worse. So the media has no reason to focus on what Yuri Bezmenov would label as non-issues. But the most important thing to understand about the media is you need to monopolize the media. You're out to destroy a country, and so what you do is you put on a show for the people. The show is very important. If you don't put on a show, people are going to resist you. But if you put on the show, like Steve Bannon said, right, you get people to project enemy images and evil onto other people, and then you get them to argue with each other. That whole thing is drama, and that's on the stage that we've all been presented with in the media. But if you monopolize the media, it means that you don't only own and control the right-wing media. Fox News, One America News Network, this thing called the Epoch Times, which is a completely untrustworthy newspaper. I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's come up in recent years.
Yeah.
These people, you don't just own their side, you own the other side. So what you have is like, I think his name is Zucker. I can't remember his first name. He's in charge of CNN. He's connected to, of all people, Ghislaine Maxwell, for God's sake. I mean, there's pictures of like his wife hanging out with them. I mean, this is what you do. You control not only news media, you control media outlets, which is another similarity between the manifesto that I was describing before and active measures, is to get your message out in media and movies and TV so that it bypasses people's protectors in terms of their rational thinking, and it just touches them on an emotional level. And specifically, I'll go into in a second, but basically, if you have a long-term process, you're working on a process that's like 50 years long, 70 years long, you have no time limit. Then like Grover Norquist said, as long as we're moving the football down the field, we're winning, right? He was the guy I mentioned before who wanted to drown the federal government in the bathtub. So you place plants in society as leaders of both sides. And that way, when you have the thought leaders of both sides and they're part of your team, then you kind of control their followers in a certain way. So, for example, Michael Moore would be a classic example of a plant who you plant decades ago. He's a sleeper. He does his thing. He notifies people that we're facing fascism. He notifies people that we're 9/11 away from losing our democracy. So people are aware that the stakes are high. There's no actual benefit. There's no actual pushback on it. So if you can imagine that Hillary Clinton doesn't mind being the target of all kinds of accusations that she's evil, then you're starting to get into an active measures mindset. I'm not saying what anybody is doing, but I'm saying that's what active measures is all about. The entire thing is a show. And think about it. If you were a well-funded organization and you wanted to destroy the institutions of society, you want to recreate society, what are you going to do? You're going to own the playing field. You're going to go in already knowing that you're going to win because you control all the pieces on the board. There are no pieces that you don't control that are significant. And so that's what Yuri Bezmenov is pointing to when he says you want to monopolize the media. So number 4 in the list of methods and tactics to demoralize a people is to manipulate their culture, to create false heroes and role models. And the result of that is to create like a mass culture and to have addictive fads. So Kardashians, reality TV, Jerry Springer, Maury Povich, these kinds of things, they degrade culture over time. They are of absolutely no value, but as long as people are paying attention to them, they actually have no idea that their government is falling apart. They don't know what to do. They don't have any allies in that world. They don't know how to connect in with that world. They don't really have any way to take actual steps to protect themselves, their families, their community, and their country. And also, if you're going to take the moving image and you're going to use the moving image as a way to demoralize a society, part of how you're going to do that is you're going to crack apart the ideology of a community. So if you're going to create movies over a long period of time, and this is what Yuri Bezmenov says, you see military leaders in movies, and this is in the times leading up to the time when he was giving his lecture and his interview. So that was in 1983, 1984. So lead up to those years, he was able to see in movies when you portray a military general, you portray them as like a power-hungry, warmongering idiot, right? So in that way, military generals are very, very well respected and probably should be respected, but they're very well respected in certain circles. But you want half the population to think that they're warmongering, insane maniacs, right? And so that's what you use movies to do, and that's what Paul Weyrich's manifesto was communicating that they wanted to do. So likewise, you have villains as protagonists in movies. You have very degraded stories that are told. You have massive riots and mass violence shown in movies. You have, things like the movie The Joker, which came out, I think, maybe last year or the year before. The Joker is like the most sociopathic, chaotic, willfully evil and malignant character maybe that's ever been created, or it's very much up there. That's in his entire point of being. And when you make a movie where he's the protagonist and where he creates riots, or at least celebrates riots, that creates something in the public mind. It doesn't have no impact. It has an impact in the public mind. And likewise, there's a movie called The Hustlers or something like that, where the heroes, the protagonists of the story, were a real-life story about a group of erotic dancers who would, right after the crash, the Wall Street crash, they didn't have anybody to come and dance for. They couldn't make their same living. They made a very healthy living before the stock market crash in 2008. After the crash, they were kind of strapped for cash, and what they decided to do is drug people, bring them back to the club, and then while they were completely intoxicated and unconscious, they would run up their credit cards. And they did this for a while. They were caught, and then they made a movie about it. And this is the way to take, basically there's no unified sense of morality anymore. Morality is kind of just, it's all relative. And that movie, that plot line speaks to that very strongly. One of the things that the main character says in the movie is, some of the people were on the C level and you didn't really want to deal with them because they weren't willing to do the things that they needed to do in order to get the real money. The B level were a certain way, but the A level people were like the hedge fund managers, and this is what she said, the hedge fund managers, the axe murderers, the CEOs, those were the people who you really wanted to go after. And so it paints a story of society that is degraded and disgusting and worthy of being overthrown. And so those are the kinds of messages that you want to have in public movies if you want to demoralize the people and to get them to hate their own government and to hate their own society and want to destroy both of those.
Hey, James, we're obviously not going to finish all this today, but let's get into a couple solutions. We'll have you back again. We'll go into some more greater detail. Well, I like to end on a little bit of an up note.
Thank you.
What can we do about this?
I would as well. So I already said, thank you so much. I could talk about this for hours. What we can look forward to is, or what we need, and why we're in the problem that we're in, is because the public cannot get answers to their questions. They can't get consensus on any issue, no matter how much pain they're in, no matter how many people are in pain, and no matter how much time goes by. So my son is now going to be 17 years old this month, and when he was born, I already was worried, and my ex we were worried and actually beside ourselves with upset about vaccines because we were afraid of harming our little baby, right? That was 17 years ago, and today we don't have any consensus on that, even though every parent, a lot of parents go through that. I'm not going to say every parent, but a lot of parents. So it doesn't matter how many people are upset. We can't get answers to our questions. That's the problem. And it shows up by something called zombie arguments. That Paul Krugman came out with a book recently called Zombie Arguments, which means arguments get repeated no matter how much time goes by. People just repeat the same arguments even though they were debunked years ago. So what we need is actually a new media model, which is what Concordis.io is about. It's to get the answers for the public that the public needs in order to run their lives and in order to vote responsibly and move society and democracy forward in a responsible way. The media is not providing a shared reality for us. We need to do it on our own, and in order to do that, we need to have a new way of having conversations. When our conversations are not productive, the way that they're not productive today, we need to talk about how we have those conversations. And we need a new way to have conversations. When you do couples communication coaching, you have a very specific format for the conversation so that you can get to your desired result, which is empathy, communication, rapport, peace, love, understanding. But when you don't apply a specific technique, you don't get the result that you want. Same thing with our media model and with our public communications, public controversies. We don't get more or less universal consensus on any issue because we don't have the tools to do it. But we're building that. So that's I hope people will be optimistic about that. What that comes down to is we need to see on the entire internet, to be quite frank, we need to see the strongest rebuttals to the things that we read on the internet and the things that other people read on the internet. And right now we don't do that. Anyway, that's a longer story. But what I would say is even maybe it's on a par with that for sure, is to learn communication skills. Because when we know the tricks that people use to avoid answering questions, we can really start to hold people accountable so that they will answer those questions instead of just kind of getting distracted or getting emotionally triggered by what they do and then losing our focus and losing track of what we were talking about to begin with. So if we had communication skills, we would be able to go back on Thanksgiving and the holidays, and we would be able to have that difficult conversation with our uncle or our grandmother who has a very different political ideology and political viewpoint than ourselves. We can actually have a conversation that built rapport and strengthened that relationship. But right now, without those communication skills, people are floundering, is my understanding of the situation. So those are two things that we can do that are actually very, very important.
Because this really hits home. My brother and sister, there's three of us, three siblings, our parents are dead. And we have a disconnect over Trumpism, basically. And every time we talk to him, it's like, those Democrats, those socialists, those whatever. He starts with the labels. Now, I get a call, and he's got heart problems. I have no idea. I had to stop and go get on the show. Is he gonna die soon in the next few days? Is he gonna be around 20 years? I don't know. It's very serious. And so I'm trying to talk to my brother. And of course, every time we talk about these issues. So I told him about this show. I don't know if he's listening or not. But how can we begin the dialogue? This happened in 2016. I've got other friends, other relatives. The UFO field was really kind of unified for a long time there. Now it's such a polarity. I think the main disconnect is the blue-red disconnect. Mm-hmm. So how can I individually, on a very personal level, talk to my brother about this strategy, this phenomenon that you're describing, and how we can maybe use this to bridge the rift we have after the 2016 election?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that. I think a lot, probably hundreds of millions, definitely tens of millions of Americans are in the same boat. It's a big conversation. I'd love to get into detail about it. One technique I can share with you right now is that when you're having a conversation with your brother, the reason you're having a conversation is because you have a shared purpose. You want to create connection between you two. You want to celebrate or enjoy each other's company. Or if you're talking about politics, perhaps you want to have the strongest, most healthy, fulfilled, wealthy America as possible. And so by invoking that shared purpose, you can actually defuse a lot of power struggle. If you start finding yourself getting into an argument, and this is on anything, even with your partner about money or any other trigger point that you're in with any relationship that you have, if you stop getting into power struggle and invoke the shared purpose, you can immediately create rapport with the other person and a sense of collaboration. Because within that shared purpose, you're collaborating. On the level of conflict, you can get into power struggle and, destroy the relationship or the rapport, quickly if you do it in a certain way. But by invoking the shared purpose, you can be committed to being in a collaborative dynamic with them. So that's one technique. But there are many, many techniques.
So, do you have? Is your family divided? Are you and all your siblings on the same page?
My siblings are more or less on the same page. My mother is definitely not on the same page with me.
Yeah. And Debra, you're really divided with your family. I don't know any family that isn't.
My family kicked me out of the family. for my anti-Trump views. I have no contact with any of my family at this point, and I'm a mother of children and grandchildren of color. So their support of Trump has been extraordinarily disturbing to me.
Right.
I think, do we have 5 minutes? Is that right? Give or take?
Yes, we do. Go. Yes, we have
I'd like
7 minutes.
Yeah, so my heart really goes out to you when I hear that you were basically excommunicated from your family, and I hear the hurt in that, and I feel so strongly that communication skills and negotiation skills, conflict resolution skills are essential, and that kind of investment in people's ability to have strong, meaningful relationships with the people in their lives is a real deficit that we have in our culture. And I would love to work with you. I could coach you. I could hold space. I could mediate with you and your family members if they were willing to. And we can probably grow some meaningful collaborative conversations. And I think that that's maybe the number one place that we can actually invest if we're going to have the kind of world that we want, which is based on collaboration rather than fundamentally competition, which in the state that we have it now, it really favors the people who are heavily competing with other people, where you have psychopaths are about 1 or 2% of the general population, but they represent 20+% of the CEO population. So this is a culture that really benefits people who are in extreme states of competition with their world. And I think that is a place I'd like to devote some attention as well.
I think it's great because
James.
I have worked for those psychopaths and been married to a psychopath. So I have firsthand experience with this, and I recognize psychopaths now as soon as I see them, but it took me a very long time to get to that point.
What's your opinion about Stephen Miller?
Definite psychopath and sociopath.
So what's the difference between narcissists and psychopaths and sociopaths, and how does one become a psychopath? James.
Well, my understanding is that psychopaths have, and I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding is that psychopaths literally have a physical characteristic in their brains which prevents them from having empathy with other people. My understanding is that sociopaths have a similar characteristic, but it's more learned rather than a physical thing that can never be healed.
So they can actually get a test and they have something physically wrong with their body that they are a psychopath. Is there anything that can be done for them if you are
I don't think so.
diagnosed as
I don't think so.
So how do we protect humanity from the psychopaths?
That's an excellent topic of conversation. I hesitate to open it up now. I have 2 minutes left, but this is a really wonderful topic.
Good answer. Excellent conversation.
Janet,
I'm very interested in. Yeah, go ahead, dear.
One of the things that I went through with the ex-husband once they realized he was a sociopath is they told me nothing could be done for him. They're like, there's far too much damage. He is what he is, and there's nothing that can be done. And for your own safety, you need to separate from him. And that's exactly what I did.
Great. Well, what do you do? Lock them all up and throw away the key? I mean, it could be argued that our president is a psychopath or a sociopath. And so what do we do when we discover someone is a psychopath? Now, is there a test?
Strong boundaries.
Huh?
Strong boundaries. When they break social norms, we have to limit their power and show them that there are serious consequences to doing that.
Not only that, I believe you need to call them out in the moment and not let them continue to get away with it with your silence.
Yes.
That's on a personal level. For some reason, we keep getting the sociopath, psychopaths. You know, we had Hitler, we've had Napoleon, we've had, over the years, these people get into positions of power, and they, lots of people die because they're in power. They get marched off to war. They get, involved in the process, and they lose their heads, they lose their lives.
Yeah. I'd love to...
the argument that we could have a test that we would, before someone can take office, they need to take.
Yeah.
Like a whole committee, not the family doctor.
Yeah.
Ahead,
I'd like to share with you, there's a whole conversation about this in the psychiatric community around Donald Trump, and there's something called the Goldwater Rule, because there was a magazine when Barry Goldwater was running for president, I think in 1968, he was labeled a psychopath by a magazine, and then the American Psychiatric Association came in and imposed on their own members the Goldwater Rule, which is basically a gag rule against saying such a thing against someone unless you have done a formal evaluation of them and an examination of them. So there's the Goldwater Rule that prevents a lot of psychiatrists from speaking out on Donald Trump because they obviously haven't done that test on him. But there is a Yale professor, a psychiatrist called Bandy Lee, and I implore everyone to look her up on Twitter and see what she has to say, because she's been sounding an alarm for years that we are in an extremely dangerous situation because Donald Trump has severe psychological problems that make it impossible for him to empathize with the public and the needs of the public. So when you have 100,000 plus people dead of COVID, that really doesn't land with him as a cost. So anyway, he has a different, apparently, according to Bandy Lee, I would encourage you to look that up directly, but apparently he's got his own way of being that's extremely different from normal people, and unless you really realize what's going on, things can appear very, very different than they actually are.
Great. Okay, well, we're coming up on our last 30 seconds, so people are going to want to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you, James?
Wonderful. So there's a website you can go to, peaceful.ly, and my contact information is up there. Or you can listen to a podcast of mine. It's anchor.fm/active-measures.
Okay, and send me those links. I'll put them on aquarianradio.com. I will have the link for this show when we're done broadcasting. It takes me about a day to get everything uploaded. And it's been a great show. There's so many more questions. I also want to encourage people to email questions to me, aquarianradio@gmail.com, aquarian radio@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can get them answered for you in future shows. And let's begin this dialogue and take this information far and wide, because we're running out of time. Things are happening, and I definitely don't want to see my country, my world, my society.
Janet, they can't hear you anymore.
Oh, we're off air.
Yeah, we're off air.
No music. Okay. I'm talking to myself. Okay. Thank you. I will go hang up. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Blessing. Thank